Um, Greg Richmond knows more about authorization and what it means to expect some kind of accountability from our charter schools than anyone around. He has been in it for a long time. Greg has been in the authorization business for 20 years, first in Chicago Public Schools, and then for 15 years as the CEO of NACSA, the National Association of Charter School Authorizers. And Greg has learned an awful lot in that time, and I think he wants to share with us some of his new feelings, especially about authorization of charter schools. So please welcome Greg Richmond.
Thank you, Steve. I feel so fortunate to be with everyone here today. Over the years, I've addressed many conferences, answered thousands of questions about charter schools from reporters. I've had the privilege of testifying before Congress and legislatures and met with governors and secretaries of education. But today, I feel particularly fortunate to be here with you, and here's why. Earlier this month, I stepped down as head of the National Association of Charter School Authorizers. And I come to you today not as the leader of a national organization, but as someone who has spent the past 2.5 decades in the charter school world, who believes in the power of a quality education to transform the lives of children. It's a good time for me to share a few thoughts about what I think the charter school community has done well and not so well over the years. And I hope you receive my thoughts with an open mind and an open heart, even if my experiences and beliefs are not identical to your own. From 1995 to 2005, as Steve alluded to, I was an employee in the central office of the Chicago Public Schools. For most of those years, I led the authorization of all charter schools in the city. It was a fantastic job. I was blessed to work with educators and community organizations that had ideas for dozens of schools in every corner of the city. Charter schools were brand new then, so we needed to create everything from scratch. A process for evaluating proposals, contracts, funding formulas, student discipline, special education, facility sharing, and much more. I loved it. I loved working to solve problems with creative charter school leaders and with my colleagues within the school system, with the goal of giving our schools flexibility to meet the needs of their students within a framework of public funding and public accountability. I loved knowing we were giving more options to families. I loved knowing we were empowering educators to create the school they dreamed of. It was a difficult job and a demanding job, and I loved it. But the one part of the job that I did not love was the month of August. You see, every August, our phones in the charter school office would start ringing with calls from parents and grandparents who were trying to find a new school for their child for that fall. By the time they called our office, they had usually called many schools and many other offices without success. They were getting desperate, and they felt that if they just told us the details of their child's story, that might help. You could hear the desperation in their voices, as if they were on a sinking ship, holding their child above the water, and we were their last lifeboat. They poured out their hearts about their daughter who was getting failing grades at her school last year, or their son who had fallen in with the wrong crowd, their granddaughter who was getting bullied, or their grandson who had dropped out altogether. They were calling to save their child's life, literally. and they were desperate to find an opening at another school. Was there a charter school that could take their child? Tragically, in August, when most of these calls came in, the answer was no. Every seat in every charter school was full. My heart ached for these parents and grandparents as I thought about the fact that later that night, they had to sit at their kitchen table and tell their child that they had not been able to find a new school for them. As a parent myself, I would feel devastated to share that news with my child. I would feel like a failure. But of course, these parents and children were not failures. We, the adults who ran the system of public education in our city, we were the failure. We were failing to provide all children in our city with the opportunity to go to a school that met their needs for safety, support, and development, and strong academics, their need for a healthy, well-rounded education that prepared them for success in life. I've worked for the past 23 years so that fewer parents have to have those conversations around the kitchen table, first in Chicago and then throughout the country. I've learned a lot and have developed a few beliefs about what I think the charter school movement has done well and what we have not done well. And let me share 3 of those beliefs with you. First, I believe we were right to focus on student outcomes as the ultimate barometer of our efforts. Too often in public education, process and inputs are elevated in importance above student outcomes. To some in public education, holding public hearings seems to be more important than the number of kids who can read, and complying with paperwork is more important than the number of kids who can do math. In charter schools, we flipped that. We said we are going to put student outcomes above process and inputs. We said charter schools that persistently fail to educate students should close, and those were the right things to do. But too often, we in the charter school community define student outcomes too narrowly as only standardized test scores. Now, make no mistake, I will never back down from expecting schools to teach students to read, do math, and meet objective standards. Thousands of charter schools across the country are indeed doing a better job educating students in these ways, and that is a success to be celebrated. But there is more to education and more to life than reading, math, and standardized tests. History, science, art, and music are important. Physical fitness is important. Social and emotional development is important. Critical thinking is important. Unlike schools in the traditional system, charter schools have the flexibility to broaden their definition of success and to add measures unique to their missions and programs. Yet we have not fully utilized that flexibility. That is a loss for each individual charter school, and it is a loss for the entire charter school movement when we do not look for new ways of defining school quality that could inform and improve the rest of public education. Second lesson learned. I believe we were right to try to grow the number of charter schools in order to reach as many students as possible, because there are millions of children in this country who do not have a chance to go to a good school. But in our zeal to serve more kids, we sometimes favored growth at the expense of personalization, innovation, or community engagement. We favored networks, replication, and standardization at the expense of homegrown charter schools. Growth became the goal for many in the charter school community. Yet growing rapidly often brought standardization. Now let me be clear, this is not a criticism of charter school networks. The educators in those networks are passionately driven to serve more children, just like you. Hundreds of thousands of young people are now on a better path to success in life because of them. And we need those schools to continue to succeed. My observation is that the charter school community could have and should have done an equal amount to support local, independent, single-site schools. Ironically, Ironically, the net result of underinvesting in independent schools is that the charter school movement, which was created to set educators free from the standardization of school districts, is itself at risk of becoming too standardized. Third lesson, I believe we were right to challenge the traditional system and call out its flaws. Public education in America has worked well for many, but it has also failed many. It has a history of segregated neighborhood schools, inequitable student discipline, and inadequate education of students with disabilities. We are right to challenge that history. But we are wrong if ever or whenever we imply that we are against the rest of public education, that we expect it to fail, or worse yet, that we want it to fail. Because every school is educating children, I believe it is morally wrong to want any school to fail. Yet many in the charter community promote charter schooling by condemning district schools. We often seek to assert the value of charter schools by saying that they are better than district schools, rather than saying they are offering something different and needed in our communities. Policymakers often try to use charter schools as a sanction to replace district schools, rather than an opportunity to empower educators to try new approaches. Too often, our message has been us against them, rather than us with them. So charter schools have done some things well by focusing on student outcomes, working to reach more students, and being honest about how the traditional system has left too many students behind. And we have made some mistakes that we can begin correcting. Here are 3 things we can do. First, everyone involved in the charter community, be they school operators, authorizers, incubators, advocates, or foundations, should consider how we can use the flexibility of charter schooling to create and run schools that deliver strong student outcomes defined by more than standardized test results. We need to broaden our definition of what constitutes a quality school. If we do this, more students will receive a richer, more well-rounded education. Second, everyone in the charter community should consider what we each can do to support and create more community-based, educator-led, independent charter schools. After all these years, most proposals for new charter schools still come from independent, local educators and community organizations. We need to do a better job supporting them. Third, all of us in the charter community should consider how we can work with, learn from, and support all of public education. There are still millions of children in this country without good schools, and to reach those children, we need all of public education to improve. We don't have educators to spare. We need to work together. The future of charter schools will not resemble its past, and that's okay. In fact, to meet the needs of future generations in a rapidly changing society, the future of charter schools must be different than the past. I am as optimistic about the failure as I have ever been, and one of the things that I have most admired about the charter school community is how many people within it are always pushing to recognize our strengths and weaknesses and to improve. People like you. And that is why I am so optimistic about the future of charter schools, because of the enormous amount of creativity, passion, and commitment within them. I'm extraordinarily grateful for the opportunity to work with people like you for the past 23 years, and I'm optimistic about the future of charter schools. The future is going to be different and better. Because of you and others like you, I'm optimistic that more parents and grandparents will sit at their kitchen table in years to come and tell their child good news about the school they will be attending that fall. Thank you for being great partners with me the past many years. Thank you for the incredible work you are doing now in your schools. And thank you for the service on behalf of children for years to come. Thank you.